Goedemiddag, Springtij Kangas. I was born in India. I studied economics and law. In 1984, on the night of 2nd December, there was a huge accident. There were flames coming out and gases coming out of the Union Carbide factory in Bhopal.
Yeah.
10,000 people died. 500,000 people suffered for years after that. This led to a massive argument and year-long fight for justice between the people, the government, and Union Carbide. And I do remember seeing a BBC film where they showed in Union Carbide in the United States that they were encouraging people to wear a t-shirt which said, "Have you kissed a carbider today?" Because they wanted to get rid of that damaging image of the accident in India. And that is when I decided I want to work on multinationals and North-South issues. Later, 2 years later, I got a scholarship to go to Harvard Law School. I was suffering from asthma, and I wanted to take my asthma medicines with me to the United States. And my travel agent told me that that was not possible because those medicines were forbidden in the United States. That became the topic of my master's thesis. How is it possible that American and British and Western pharmaceutical companies sell drugs in the developing world which they do not allow to their own people in their own countries? And that has made me think all along that I should think about justice. And when people talk about planetary boundaries, I wonder, is that just? So the planetary boundaries framework talks about planetary boundaries for 9 different arenas. But let's take climate change. Will 2 degrees protect the world? Will 1.5 degrees protect the world? Maybe 1.5 degrees is good from the perspective that it will not lead to a tipping point and climate instability. But already at 1 degree centigrade, tens of millions of people worldwide are suffering because of high temperatures, because of extreme weather events, and because they are exposed to all kinds of new diseases. So why should we go for 1.5? Why didn't we go for 1 degree centigrade when 1 degree centigrade is much more just than 1.5? When I came to the Netherlands, I was writing a book called Toxic Terrorism. It was about the fact that rich countries were dumping toxic waste on the developing world. Even today, the European Union exports plastic waste, so everything that you put into your plastic garbage somehow finds its way on a ship to Asia. Our electronic wastes are going to Africa. My students in Delft have done research about what happens when all this electronic waste, which is actually sent not as waste, arrives. Most of the time, they say that this electronic waste is still good. It can still work. But by the time it arrives, it doesn't work anymore, so it basically gets dumped. And this leads to a lot of problems for these people in these countries. So there's a lot of North-South stories that I can tell you with respect to pharmaceuticals, climate change, biodiversity loss, waste, etc. But let's move to a more simple story. Suppose we pollute our air, as we do in New Delhi. Almost everybody in New Delhi that can afford it has now got air purifiers in every single room of their house because they don't want to fall ill. 7 million people die from air pollution every year worldwide. Let's take water. We mess up our water, then we develop technologies to clean the water. We kill the bees, then we develop drones to do the functions of the bees. So we have technology experts who develop technologies which end up polluting the atmosphere, and then they produce new technologies to solve the problem. And it keeps going on, and everybody wants to focus on innovative technologies that create new problems that, again, technology has to solve. There is, of course, a lot of benefit from technology, but there also needs to be some thought given to when do we use these technologies and when do we not use it. And of course, we all know that there's a limit to our biosphere. If you have been to Arizona, there is an experiment that was started many, many years ago called Biosphere 2. It was an experiment to make a sustainable system, and the only thing that came from outside was energy. That system failed. They were not able to recreate an energy system that functions. So we don't have a second a different way of creating a sustainable Earth for ourselves, and most of us can't afford to go to another planet in any case, which some people are actually thinking about. Now, so we have Earth system boundaries. Within the Earth Commission, we worked on safe and just boundaries for 5 domains, and we found 8 targets. One for climate change, for example, was 1 degree is safe and just. For the biosphere, I'll give you one target, which is that every kilometer of used land should reserve 25% for nature. And this is good for our mental health, but it's also good to allow earthworms and bees to move. Now, so we came up with all these boundaries, and then we tried to see, are we within those boundaries or not? And 7 of those 8 boundaries have been crossed. The only boundary we have not crossed at global level is the atmospheric boundary, but that is the one boundary from which 7 million people die every year, all over the world. And so for that, we created a boundary at 1 cubic meter air pollution boundary. Now, we are outside the boundary. And this basically means that anybody who talks about the SDGs is basically going to go outside the boundary. So if you provide food, water, energy, and infrastructure to the poorest people on Earth, you will be outside the boundary. We have actually calculated this. Now, you might come back and say there are too many people on Earth. And I'm going to come back and tell you that it's the top 4% that consume and pollute as much as it would need us to provide the minimum access to all the people on Earth for food, water, electricity, and energy, and infrastructure. I'm talking about a room the size of this parking space, or 3 electric bulbs and 1 fridge. So basically, we have to do something about the global inequality that we currently have worldwide. We moeten, anders, denken. Now, if we want to live within these boundaries, and we want to make sure that everybody in the world has access to minimum resources, we will need to transform our systems. How do we transform? One of the first elements of such transformation in an Earth system justice approach would be to attack the fundamental causes of these problems. Our economic system, our continuous pursuit of GDP growth, of profits, our desire to make Netherlands a tax haven, people wanting to avoid paying taxes when they're so incredibly rich that they would not even miss the money. So how do we transform that system? That's the first part, trying to change the economic and also the legal system. The second part is, what about creating liability? In all cultures in the world, if you cause harm, you are held liable. But when the climate change treaty was being negotiated, we took out the article on liability. And even now, basically, we all think we don't have to pay anybody any money if their island disappears, or if there's a forest fire in Canada, or if there is a problem in Hawaii, or Bangladesh goes underwater. We don't care because we don't have to pay any compensation to those people. I think Earth system justice means that we have to start thinking about liability systems, because we do have to compensate those whose futures we have impacted. We moeten anders tellen. Now, talking about money, subsidies. You've all been reading in the newspapers every day this week the amount of subsidies that we actually pay to fossil fuel is going up. It's an enormous amount, now almost reaching 46 billion euros. At the same time, the aid that we give to developing countries for climate change is in millions. It's really very small. So, what we are trying to do is dweilen met de kraan open. Met een hele kleine dweil en een hele grote kraan. For me, it's very important that we talk about phasing out fossil fuels. Every time we talk about increasing green renewable energy or something else to solve the climate problem, we forget that if we don't try to close the fossil fuel industry, we will never close it down. all the scholarship shows us that whenever you focus on renewables and you don't focus on closing down fossil fuels, in fact, the demand for energy goes up and people consume more and more and more. And so therefore, we now have to really focus on closing down these fossil fuel companies. But it's going to hurt us a lot because our pensions are investing in it, our savings are in fossil fuel indirectly or directly. I mean, even though Dutch development banks and all the development banks worldwide have now decided that they will not finance fossil fuel, they put half their money in developing country banks who put their money in fossil fuel. And so therefore we are investing in fossil fuel. We look at export credit. The Netherlands was giving money in through export credit to Dutch companies to invest in fossil fuel in the global south. Now they've said, okay, we won't do it, and there are still loopholes in the law. So there is something that we have to drastically do in this process, but it is going to hurt us and hurt us all. And I think we have to be brave because we need to be prepared that we will get hurt in this process. So what do we have to do? We have to invest in electric vehicles. But I would say let's invest in electric public transport. Let's not do private cars, because if the whole world drives in electric private cars, we're going to have a massive problem. And in the meanwhile, I doubt if we will get the amount of lithium we want, because all over the world there are protests now because the lithium mining is so incredibly poisonous. So I think we have to start thinking very differently about what makes us happy. I've now moved from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the richest countries in the world, and we are a really happy society. Why can't we be happy with less? I'm sure we can all be happy with less. I also believe that the very rich people will be happy with less, only they don't know it. So it's our duty to explain to them that they haven't figured it out. Woo-hoo! And our government must really start to take the leadership role. You know, when I came to the Netherlands, I was so much in love with Holland. We were leaders on climate change, on waste at that time, 30 years ago. And we were telling the whole world, we were trying to convince prime ministers and heads of state here in The Hague in 1989, March, to agree that climate change was a big problem. 6 months later, there was a Nordwijk conference on climate change. We were again trying to tell the whole world to take action on climate change. This was under the VVD ministers. And then something happened in the Netherlands. It suddenly fizzled out. And then suddenly we were no longer leading. And I was in shock that there is, at this moment, not even one person in the ministry has written in a drawer, hidden to everybody, a plan about how we can get off fossil fuel. There is no such plan. And that really, really worries me. And therefore, wij moeten anders sturen. I'll go back to a little story. There is a professor in Pakistan who said, the world is a third world country. Everything you see in a third world country, corruption, poverty, inequality, manipulation, marginalization of the poor, everything you see in a third world country, you see at the global level. Because the global institutions are also quite corrupt. They're also protecting the super rich, the super powerful. And so basically, if we are to try to change the world, we have to try to figure out a way to understand that we are part of a massive global corrupt system that is unendlessly using our resources and polluting the earth for others. So therefore, I come to my plan, my ideas, which is the constitution. In the Netherlands, we have a grondwet. Many countries in the world have a grondwet. It protects you. And we need a constitution at the global level. We need a constitution which says that everybody has certain rights, rights to basic resources, and rights not to be harmed by people elsewhere in the world. We need a constitution which says there are planetary boundaries, and we must choose the just and safe planetary boundaries. It must say that everybody in the world should have access to minimum resources, and it should try and create a system of liability, that if you cause harm to others, that you are held responsible to them. The biggest problem we have is that our CEOs are here for 3.5 years at the most, and then they move. And so they take their profits, and when there's a problem, they're not there. They're not thinking long term. Prime ministers are not thinking long term. Nobody is thinking long term in this entire process. And therefore, I want to focus on a global constitution that tries to think long term and protect us all against ourselves. Thank you.